Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to my booth here and out there. I'm Jay. Today, this is a one-year follow-up review of the Studiobricks One VO edition. Why am I doing this? Well, my first video was designed to answer the questions that I had before diving in and making this big investment for myself and my voiceover business. These booths are pricey, and you can't really try them until you buy them, sadly. And so, for folks out there, that's what that first video was designed to do. If you haven't seen it and you have questions, you may find value in it. Go check it out and come back, because we may expand on some things. This video is, what did I learn over the past year? What do I love about the booth? What have I found that maybe I might adjust if I were Studiobricks and making design tweaks? And then finally, the big question at the end of the day, was it still worth that, very hefty sum of money to invest in? Starting with the biggest reason why I got this booth, sound isolation. How soundproof is it? That was my main reason to do that. That's why we've got this camera and that camera. That's my phone out there with a special microphone attached to it to give it a little bit of a heightened sensitivity. And then, of course, in here we've got the Earthworks ethos that I'm speaking into. So first, we'll get a room tone, just what it sounds like in here with nobody talking. And there you go. Now we'll jump out there. And back inside. And now I'm just going to talk at a conversational level, and we'll jump back and forth. So here we are talking, and this is what it sounds like in here if we jump out there. Coming back inside, it's pretty decent isolation, as you can see. The door is sealed. It has a nice sealing mechanism and all that jazz. We'll jump one more time back outside, give you... Come on back in. So all in all, the isolation is really, really great. And the main reason why it was so important for me, I live in Brooklyn. And my quality of life in my DIY booth was just not up to snuff in terms of isolation. I was experiencing a lot of stress. Whenever I would book a live session, I wouldn't know if a dog would be barking, if someone would be doing maintenance in the building, if there would be a jackhammer going on outside, if planes would fly by. That stress in and of itself was enough for me to consider getting this booth. But additionally, I live with another human being who has to live their life on their day-to-day basis. And it's just not fair to ask them, hey, I have an audiobook that I'm recording all day today. Can you not, talk or move very much because I need it to be quiet? That's just not fair. And so I wanted to get this booth to improve quality of life for myself and my lovely wife and our cat, so that they don't have to worry about being quiet for me. And it works really, really well. Now, there are a couple things that I will say. The isolation is not perfect. There are sounds that will get through this booth, as well as, frankly, any booth that you buy. If a plane flies overhead, we're using very sensitive microphones. It's going to pick it up to some degree. If a siren goes by, I'll hear it to some degree. If my cat is sitting right outside and decides to meow at me incessantly, I'll hear it. I'll hear it, Liz. Do you hear me? I'll hear it. She's outside right now. And similarly, if I'm inside my booth and say I'm recording an animated show or a video game where I have to do some pretty loud, dynamic stuff, I'm going to turn down my microphone for this, but if I get loud, you can hear that it sounds like this. But if I go outside, you can hear that it sounds like this. And then if we come back in, here we are. This is what it sounds like when I'm talking like this. There are a couple shows that I record that my wife will know when I'm recording them because she can hear the voices that I'm doing and she'll call me out on them. So it's not perfect, and it works both ways. Inside, if I'm doing that sort of performance, it'll be heard outside to some degree. And conversely, if someone's having a conversation outside at just a sort of, low conversational level, it's fine. But if the conversation becomes animated or louder, or people start to get excited, or say someone moves loudly, it'll still come into the booth at some level. So that's the sound isolation. All in all, A+ with some little caveats there. Next, the acoustics. How the heck does it sound in here? Long story short, it sounds pretty good. Now, I will say, my DIY booth, I like the sound a little bit better. And then I asked myself, well, why? My DIY booth was 4 walls of sheetrock and then about 6 inches of insulation, high quality construction insulation, and then about 2 inches of acoustic insulation specifically designed to eat sound like crazy. And that was my booth. So let's be honest, if you surround yourself with a full 6 inches of insulation on every side, it's going to be pretty darn dead in that space. This is not 6 inches of insulation, but it's still really, really solid. And so the acoustics in here are great. A couple things that are important to recognize. The size of this booth, any booth that is relatively small like this, is going to have resonances. Resonance in your space, sound waves have a physical length to them. Some frequencies of sound will bounce back and forth between the dimensions of your booth perfectly, and they'll amplify. They'll begin to resonate a bit. The frequency waves will stack on top of each other and become louder than they maybe normally would. So you're going to contend with that, and you do here. But I fixed that with just a couple extra pillows in my space, beefing up a little bit of the bass traps in the corners of the booth, and just using some surgical EQ to tame a few of those particularly heavy resonant frequencies. Do you need to do that? No. The booth sounds just fine without that sort of treatment. You can improve it pretty easily by going a little bit further, and that doesn't cost you very much at the end of the day. Additionally, there's this lovely glass door, which is fantastic for quality of life. Having light come into your booth, being able to wave at people as they walk by as you're recording something, seeing the sun and not being trapped inside a small box for hours a day. It's very, very helpful to have a big old window there and just make things feel a little bit more permeable and, lively. However, glass is a reflective surface for sound. So this essentially is a giant sound bouncing wall that you can hear the reflection for sometimes, particularly if you're using very sensitive microphones. After my first video, Studiobricks reached out and they said, hey, we love that video that you made. Can we use it in our social media stuff? I said, absolutely, sure. And they said, as a thank you, we'd love to send you some accessories. One of those accessories was a reflection dampener for this glass door. I don't know if they'll include it in their future booths just as a standard item, or if it's something you have to purchase additionally, or how it works, but it's essentially high-quality felt material with 6 suction cups perfectly dimensioned for this glass door. And it's lovely. Sometimes I'll use it if I want really pristine sound to eliminate as many reflections as I can, or if I just want to focus. If those things, waving hi to people, the sun is going to potentially cause me a distraction, I'll throw that sheet up effectively, and it's no longer an issue. So those 2 things are really, really great to consider there. And that's sort of a segue into the VO edition aspect of this booth, VO edition. The VO edition comes with a few extra accessories if you're not familiar, namely this Yellowtech mounting system. It includes this mic boom arm, as well as a swiveling copy stand mount and or a monitor mount if you so choose. It comes with this table and this bass trap behind me. The bass trap is absolutely essential, so whether or not you get the VO edition, you must get the bass trap. It is imperative for VoiceOver that it's in this booth, otherwise your sound will be way too muddy and resonant to be usable. Very important. Does that mean you need the VO edition? No. In fact, if I could do it over, and if I had a larger living space that I could afford to, eat up a bit of real estate with a larger booth, I may have chosen to, instead of getting the VO edition of the Studiobricks One, which is their smallest size, I would simply get a larger sized booth and use my own table, my own mic arm, my own monitor stands and mounts, just so that I cut down my overhead cost, had a bit more space to work with, and was just a little bit more tailored and comfortable to me and my body instead of being built into this space. Does that mean I'm unhappy with the VO edition? Very important distinction. No, I'm very happy that I bought this edition, and I love it. Having everything integrated into the booth adds to sort of a streamlined aesthetic, which I just love. I will say the table, I noted this in my first review, is at just somewhat of an awkward height. It's a little too tall for a sitting desk and a little too short to be an effective standing desk for me and my body. Doesn't mean that it'll be that way for everybody, but for me, it's the case. So a couple of things that I would say is if Studiobricks were to give the option to have a sit-stand type modular thing going on, that would absolutely be a game changer for me. But that said, I've learned to live with it. It doesn't bother me anymore. Two things that have helped me with that. One, I got this stool. This stool was fantastic. This is one of the reasons why I would have gotten a larger booth is the space is pretty limited here. It's not claustrophobic by any stretch, but it doesn't give you a ton of breathing room, namely if you wanted a full desk chair. I was pretty much relegated to getting this stool by virtue of having really limited space. Now, this is a Core 360 chair, and I got it because I like their shtick. They have this thing called active sitting. I've done a lot of Alexander training. If you don't know what that is, look it up. But it's effectively, I can move my hips. It helps me align myself. It keeps me active, and I get to get up and walk around every now and again, which is all just great. The things I had to consider with this were A, the size of the chair in terms of, lateral dimensions, but also it had to be tall enough that I could sit on it and have my arms rest here comfortably. Those were kind of my limiting factors, and so I couldn't get just a straight desk chair. It had to be tall enough to use this desk, but it also had to be small. And anyway, a lot of stuff to work around, but I landed on the Core 360. Check them out if you're so choosing. I'm not sponsored, I just like their stuff. Next up, these are sort of my critiques or suggestions should Studiobricks be interested. We'll throw them out there and things for you to consider. The pass-through ports. There is a cable pass-through, which is really great and easy to manage. However, it would be really nice and frankly, I think better if it was on the back side of the booth rather than the front side. Typically, these booths will be oriented where one side is pretty much always going to be facing a or the wall in the space. And on walls are your power outlets. So, by having the cable pass through away from the wall, it forces you to route your cables somewhat arbitrarily an extra several feet in order to get to that cable pass-through. Additionally, by virtue of that, your cables are exposed, you have to wrangle them a bit, and it just becomes a little bit of a cable management, consideration, which would easily be solved if the ventilation system and the port pass-through were swapped on different sides where they are now. It's not a huge thing, but just a small design tweak that would really, really help. Other things that might be cool on the pass-through would be if there was built-in power supply where there were just outlets where we could jack in the wall outlet or something like that, and an XLR pass-through where we could just plug XLR cables into the wall instead of having to route them through or have everything inside. Just things that would be nice, small quality of life improvements. Next, in my first video, I was raving about how quiet the ventilation system was. And I said, I'm not even sure that I'm using it correctly because it's so quiet. I was right. I was not using it correctly. It is an EU voltage with an EU outlet jack. So the booth comes with a power adapter supply where you can adjust the voltage being passed from the wall to the ventilation system. I had the voltage selected improperly. Figured it out after a while, but long story short, the ventilation system, if you're using a microphone that has excellent noise rejection, like a dynamic microphone, something with a really tight polar pattern, You might be able to get away with using the ventilation system for certain projects that don't require really pristine noise floors. Anything else, you're going to have the ventilation system off more likely than not. And it doesn't get tremendously hot in here. The passive airflow is great. And I found another workaround by routing a exhaust fan through ducting in the roof of this out to a decoupled sort of inline fan booster that effectively pulls air out of my booth and helps to mitigate the temperature and increase airflow. So that does its job a little bit. It still does get a little steamy. I'm starting to get a little glisten of sweat on my forehead, both because I have lights on in here, but it's also just kind of hot. So that's the ventilation system. Some folks have asked if you can do without the ventilation system. Unfortunately, no. It comes with the booths. They itemize it differently for some reason, but you have to buy the ventilation system because it's part of the sound insulation factor. It's a specific thing that helps to isolate the sound a little bit more while allowing for airflow. Next up, again, the quality of life of being in this booth cannot be understated for me personally. That was another one of the big things, aside from the sound isolation, aside from having just good acoustics and all that jazz, aside from being able to move from apartment to apartment if we needed and be able to take my booth with me. Aside from all that, coming into a space that has polished aesthetics, makes you feel good to be in, whether or not you buy this booth or you build one for yourself, whatever it is, I'm a firm believer that the space that you come to work, if it makes you feel good, then you'll want to be there and you'll do better work as a sort of byproduct of that. And this booth does that for me, for all the reasons I've listed already, but it's just a nice place that I enjoy spending time and performing in, and that can't be understated, especially in a business where mental health, it goes through its peaks and valleys at times. So A+ there. And the last thing that I'll say that has been a not big plus, but it's been a plus, is Studiobricks is now a pretty recognizable brand and a sort of stamp of professionalism for voiceover artists. This acoustic paneling is recognizable. The door is recognizable. People will always say, "You got a Studiobricks, don't you?" And that little branding tick, it means that you have the sort of liquid funds in your business that you can buy this thing outright. That's not nothing. Additionally, it says that you take yourself seriously as a voiceover artist, that you take your business seriously, that you prioritize providing high-quality stuff for your clients. It just amplifies your business and brand a little bit more by virtue of it. Does that mean you need a Studiobricks? Absolutely not. People record A-list, animated shows in closets. So you don't need a booth, but for all the reasons I've stated, I've been very happy with mine, which leads us to the last thing. At the end of the day, was it still worth it? Was it still worth the $10,000+ or whatever it was? For me, it has been, namely because of the quality of life and the sound isolation improvement. But it's just a great place for me to spend my time. So that wraps it up for me here. If you have any questions about this booth, about my experience with it, please feel free to drop me a line down below, reach out on my website. And if you want to support these efforts, you know what to do. There's buttons, give them a click. There's things in the description if you want to go a step further. And thank you very much. Until the next one, be well, everybody. Toodles.